All right, so this is the first thematic session of the day, and the format is that we have two presentations followed by a panel discussion. So we will have the presentations, and I request you to hold on to your questions, and the panel conversation is where the discussion will flow into the theme, and you can ask questions to the speakers as well as the new guests who will be joining the panel session. With that, I will introduce Fabio Duarte, who is our first speaker of this session. Fabio is the Associate Director of Research and Design and a Principal Research Scientist at the MIT Senseable Lab. The lab is a pioneer in advancing urban innovations through design and science. He's also a lecturer in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning and affiliated with the Sustainable Urbanization Lab at the Center of Real Estate at MIT. His recent books include Urban Play, published by the MIT Press. There seems to be another book he has wrote is Unplugging the City, and his papers has been published in several flagship Nature portfolio journals. He has attracted over 6,500 citations to date on Google Scholar, one of the highest by any smart cities scholars across the world. He holds a PhD from the University of Sao Paulo and has taught at Yokohama University, Japan, Twente University, Netherlands. Duarte is also a consultant on urban planning with the World Bank. With that, I'll welcome Fabio to the dais and take it away. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, good morning, everyone. So today we had a pretty nice lecture about smart cities, not only from our speakers, but also here with the technical crew. We're going to have to improvise between the system and I improvised tech here, right? So let's do it. So my name is Fabio. I work at the Senseable Lab, and we are at MIT, so we're welcome. For me, it was a pleasure to arrive here yesterday. Yesterday morning was minus 4 degrees when I biked to MIT, so arriving here was a pleasure. But the lab, besides MIT, we have been working in different cities around the world. So what we see here is in green, all the cities where the lab has been working for the past 20 years. And we have this class that we give with public officials, MIT and Harvard students, and we go to the cities to work with them in solutions for the cities, whichever problem they have. But also, recently, we have been expanding Senseable Lab in a global initiative. So we have a permanent team based in Amsterdam for 12 years now, so we are now 15 people there. We have a team in Dubai, we have 8, and we just opened a lab in Rio, in Brazil. And we have 6 people, and we are hiring. So if you know anybody who wants to go to Rio, it's beautiful, and then you'll be doing research with us there. And obviously, we have Senseable in Boston, where we're about 30 people. So it's a pretty large work. And I will focus here in research. And when we talk about data, we have data everywhere, etc. I think what we try to do is to say that, okay, we have 2 types of data. One data is what we call the opportunistic data. So currently, we are generating, obviously, data. Everybody is doing that. So obviously, MIT knows that I'm here because I have an MIT cell phone. He knows, okay, oh, Fabio is now in Miami. But also, when I connect to this network, University of Miami knows, okay, Fabio is there. But also, with all our self-tracking devices, all the sensors that are embedded in our buildings, we are generating lots of data. So this data we call opportunistic. And why opportunistic? Because we're not collecting this data for a specific purpose. Data is there. Let's see what we can find about cities using this opportunistic data. However, sometimes I think this is a trap. And why is a trap? Because sometimes we as researchers, we said, okay, I can only put some question if I have data. If I don't have data, sometimes we leave even very important questions aside. So we need, at some point, to build our own sensors. And the lab has been doing that a lot. So we go from deploying sensors on scooters to measure a vibration in bridges, to assess the seismic movement that can be a good proxy for infrastructural health, to deploying robots in sewage system to collect samples and measure levels of bacteria, salt, sugar, viruses, etc. So there is this combination in the lab of using opportunistic data, but also building our own sensors. And what I'm going to do now is to show you 6 projects. 3 using opportunistic data, and 3 using purpose data, so the sensors. The first one is Signature of Humanity. This is a kind of old project that we did, and the idea was the following. I don't remember what was the situation in the world, but it was in one of the moments, not very dissimilar of the one that we live now, that we were discussing that, okay, people are different, the cultural clash, etc. And say, look, if we're so different, let's see if we can only see how people communicate. Let's take only metadata of all communication networks that we have in the world, and let's put them in a timeline. So I will play the first video. And the idea here was, okay, let's take only metadata using cell phone. And this is what we did. Can you hear, right? Okay, cool. So here, what you have is only metadata of all cell phone networks. Initially, we got only the United States. So I don't care the content of your message. I don't care who you're speaking with, but I know that you're using text or video or social media, and we are compiling all this data in time. So how many messages, how many videos, etc. you have used in 1 hour, in 2 minutes, etc. And then we put in a timeline for the day. And once we have done this for the United States, we decided, okay, let's see if we can go broader, and let's see whether people in the Americas or Asia or Europe, they communicate similarly or not. And this is what we did. And when we normalized how we communicate with each other in time and by type of media, what we found is that regardless any apparent cultural difference, we have the signature of humanity. We communicate the same way. So for us, it was an important message at that point, and we opened avenues to explore this metadata without entering any content. The other project that I'd like to show is Minimum Fleet. So Minimum Fleet, it was done in New York a few years ago when the mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg, was at the time. He started putting out their New York Open Data Portal, and Bloomberg, he has a saying in his wall that said, okay, as those who are not Americans, you might not believe, but in the dollar bill is written, "In God we trust." So Michael Bloomberg would say, okay, in God we trust. Everybody else brings me data. And this was the idea that he had. And then when he put out one of the data sets was about the 150 million taxi rides that happen in New York per year. 150 million taxi trips. And our question, we had 2 papers on that. One of them was in the Proceedings of National Science Foundation, but the other one was in Nature. And this one, the idea was very simple. Because we had all the taxi data, all the GPS, so we knew where the taxi was at any given moment, we knew that 50% of all taxis in New York, they run empty. And a fun fact, if you take a taxi in New York, never try to take a taxi around 4 p.m. And why? Because they disappear. And for one reason, because some union agreement, the shift of all taxis, they have to happen between 3 and 4 p.m. So that's the worst part of getting a taxi in New York. But then, what do we decide to do? Look, if we have so many empty taxis running in New York, could we keep all the same trips so the passengers would never see any change? But could we simply reroute all the taxis with a centralized control system in a way that we could minimize the number of taxis serving the same trips? And this is what we decided to do, in a way that, okay, if I bring somebody here, and then another colleague brings somebody there, so let's say I'm a taxi driver and I brought you here, and somebody brought somebody there, then okay, what should we do? Taxi drivers would either stay waiting for another passengers, or would start driving randomly to find some other passengers. But based on 150 million trips, I could predict that, okay, the probability of having a passenger there in 5 minutes, and he has another passenger in 2 minutes there, it's much higher. So it's easier that I send this taxi driver there, and I wait, and then I send my taxi somewhere else. So it would optimize. And what we found in this project is that we could save a lot of taxi rides without changing anything in people's behavior. This does not have sound. So what we see here is all the taxi rides in New York. So then what we had to do is create this massive network with all the origin destinations, and then start seeing which would be the optimal, the probable destination of each taxi to get the passengers. And once we did that, we had a few outputs. The first one was that it was the cover of Nature, which is a pretty important journal. And for us it was special because it's very rare, if you go through Nature magazine, to see how many times cities are featured on the cover. Is very rare. So this is how important cities are when we think about any urban phenomenon, any world phenomenon. But also, at that time, Uber, we did 2 works about optimization, and Uber started working also with us to monitor infrastructure health in cities. This is important because the lab has been working a lot and on purpose only with private companies. Luckily for us, we haven't been hit for any cut in the federal funding, because from the very beginning, our sponsors are private companies. And this is good for us. But then, with the same data, we decided to respond one answer, that this was also published in Nature. And when I present this work, I'm always surprised because the question was very simple. Was the following: so how people move in cities in the way that if I tell you, look, I have a finding, and I have a hypothesis, and I want to do a research, and I want to publish this research in Nature. So researchers in this room, hear me careful, my hypothesis. The hypothesis is, you travel more often to close destinations, and you travel less often as farther as you go. Any question about that is so obvious, right? So obviously, I travel much more frequently from Cambridge to Boston than I travel from Cambridge to Miami. It's obvious. So how come this can be a research and can be published in such a good journal? We found that there is no mathematical explanation to prove whether this is true or not. So what do we got? We got the lab has lots of physicists and mathematicians and computer science. Okay, look, we have this hypothesis, which is obvious. We travel more frequently to close destinations and more infrequently as far we go. nobody has proven this mathematically, let's do that. And then we prove. Now we have sound. And this is also, I like this visualization a lot. Because also the research behind is so simple, the question is so simple. So how to make people interested in reading something that's so obvious? So I think in this case, data visualization plays a role. And what's nice that we had cell phone data for all the region in Boston, but then we went to other cities in the world to see whether this was a universal law or not. And then when we proved that there is a mathematical equation saying that, okay, it's true, you move less frequently as far as you go, and this is not a linear rule, but not only is not a linear rule, but it happens everywhere in Africa, in Boston, in Americas. That's why it went to nature. So these three research show, okay, when we have data, and this opportunistic data that is there available, what we need to do is to come up with some interesting research. That's very nice. However, sometimes we don't have data, and we have to build our own. The first project is called bike trafficking. And bike trafficking is the following. So we have been working in Amsterdam for, as I mentioned, 12 years. We developed a fleet of autonomous boats for Amsterdam. Now it's a startup. If you go to Amsterdam and you cross the main river in Amsterdam, the Eye, you're going to be using autonomous boats, even though you see a skipper there. The skipper is there in case the computer fails. Otherwise, it's autonomous boat. But then we were going to Amsterdam, and for us, even coming from Boston, this is amazing, right? We have bikes everywhere. And then going to Amsterdam frequently, once I was there, and in the cover of the main newspaper, Het Parool, it was saying, the only thing that I could figure out is that the police had fished out of the canals 5,000 bikes. And I say, oh my God, this is a lot. And then, when I was talking to a friend of mine who could read Dutch, he said, okay, actually, the journal, the article is saying that per year, 80,000 bikes are stolen in Amsterdam. 80,000 bikes. Probably, it's more than all the bikes that have ever rodden in Los Angeles, right? And they fish out of the canals every year. So we asked them, okay, where do they go? Where do the stolen bikes go? And they told me, we don't know. So what we decided to do, look, you don't know where the 8,000 bikes go? What's our hypothesis to the police? And they say, look, probably they are stolen in Amsterdam, and they are sent either to other parts of the Netherlands or to East Europe. These were their hypotheses. And okay, let's try to do something. So what we got, somehow, Amsterdam police gave us 100 bikes. We refurbished the bikes. We put a tracker under the seat of each bike, and we had the hotspots of where the stolen bikes were reported. So we went there and we locked 100 bikes throughout Amsterdam. And then the master student who was working with me said, okay, look now, master student, now you can go on vacation, and then in 2 years you come back and you see something. But this is not what happened. So we were visiting the city, and then we had to map where to put, and after we put the 100 bikes in 5 months, I say, Titus, come back, you have to write your dissertation, because 70 were stolen. And then we started to see where the bikes were flowing around Amsterdam, right? And when we finished the research, we said, okay, look, what are the main, let me just put here this map. And then, okay, what happened at that point was the following. We had the paper approved, the publication was ready, and then we received a call from the municipality, okay, look, they tried to block the publication. Okay, no, you cannot publish this paper because you are revealing theft in Amsterdam or whatever. Obviously, MIT doesn't care, say we are publishing in any case. But then the police realized that, okay, this could be a good thing for them because bike theft is a proxy of other urban crimes. So they started using this as a tool to understand other urban crimes in the city. And the main three findings are the following. First, bikes do not leave Amsterdam. They remain the same in the same city. Secondly, bikes, they tend to return to the same spot where they were stolen. And the third lesson is, if you buy a second-hand bike in Amsterdam, you are probably buying your own bike. So don't do that. And then another project that we did a few years ago was Underworlds. So it was before the pandemic, and I will go to the pandemic at that point. But then the idea was the government of Kuwait came to MIT, and Kuwait has a large foreign population, and they are the second largest salt consumption in the world, and the fourth largest sugar consumer in the world. And they said, okay, look, we want to do a public health program here, and monitoring sewage. And I say, okay, fine. And for us, this was important because when we are talking about smart cities, we forget that we have these legacy infrastructures that we simply forget. But if we are here, it's because we have these legacy systems here, right? But what kind of information we have there that we're not using properly? And one of them is, okay, we have lots of information about public health there. Why not leverage it? So cities do that, but what cities do? They go to the wastewater treatment plant to sample sewage, but when the water is there, this sewage, is basically dirty water. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know when it was generated. I don't know if Coral Gables and Miami Beach, they share the same treatment plant, but if it does, you can imagine that whatever if you go to the restroom now to generate data, probably your data will be mixed with somebody in Miami Beach. And then for public health, what can I do? Nothing. So we said, okay, what if we go and collect data at the manhole? And then I went there, do it myself. And as you can imagine, it's very disgusting. If you have never sampled sewage in your life, if you don't need to, don't do that. It's so disgusting that it's hot, it's smelly, it's awful. But then we have PhD students to do that for us, right? But then we said, okay, but it's too harsh. So we started to develop some robots. The first one was Mario, but Mario was kind of chubby, and Mario was stuck into the sewage system. So we said, okay, we have to have a new generation of robots. And then we went with a second version, which is Luigi. And Luigi is much slimmer, and it can filter sewage, and we would bring to the lab only filtered sewage. And we could detect bacteria, viruses, salts, several stuff. And then eventually we went with Yoshi. As you might know, those in the know, Yoshi is the ugliest one, but it's very effective. And we can keep it there for 24 hours, sampling every 30 minutes, refrigerated, is super good. And what we decided to do with this data, first, we said, okay, look, how to convince cities and citizens that sewage is something that we should talk about. So we had the visualization, we built some systems and dashboards that cities could use in their engagement work. And we did this in Cambridge, then we did in Seoul, in South Korea, each city, in Kuwait, obviously, and each city was for a specific goal. And the last one, which we ended last year, was in Valencia, in Spain, about sexually transmitted diseases. In Boston was drug consumption. In Kuwait was dietary habits. So it varies a lot. But one of the outputs also was that in 2018, when we were finishing the work, we found that the easiest thing to find in sewage is prescription drugs. Our concern is that if we find prescription drugs in the sewage and we release this data, what might happen? Police force would go to these neighborhoods to address the problem. But the problem is not with the consumers, but with the doctors who are prescribing prescription drugs inadvertently. So we shut down this part of the project, and two of those PhD students, they opened a startup called BioBot, 2018. When the pandemic hit, they were ready to monitor COVID-19, and they were monitoring 200 cities daily in the United States for COVID-19. So this is another example of how the work of the lab goes beyond scientific publications to have some real-world impact. And the last one, if I may, is that, okay, when we're talking about smart cities, I think we should forget about Dubai, New York, and this type of thing. When we think about urbanization, this is where the world is growing. It's not another Doha. This is a favela in Rio. And a few years ago, by the way, in the cover of the MIT technology review that Jennifer showed, we have a short paper about this work there. Because, okay, look, one problem of doing work here is that even when the city decides to provide public services, it's very difficult to map what is there. We have so much obstruction that even with satellite imagery, you cannot have a perfect map of this favela. So we decided, okay, how can we map this favela? So we decided, okay, what if we go there with a handheld LiDAR, right? LiDAR is a laser scanner that it bounces around, collecting only measurements from whatever you have the emitter and the first obstacle. And we went there to measure, to create the first map of this 100,000 inhabitants favela in Rio. And let me just play the final video, and then you're going to see what we did. And the challenge is that even when the city, in that case, they were trying to provide sewage, they could not find the houses because they are so enmeshed with each other. And they only allow us to enter there with the LiDAR, but never with a cell phone. So no images have ever been taken in some areas there, only this type of information. So that's it, what I had for us today. Thank you very much for the invitation, and happy to discuss later. Thank you.